Coming up on the program, it's time to harvest our spaghetti and butternut squash. I'll show you when the right time to harvest so you can get proper storage. And we have bean rust. We'll explain what it is, how you get it, and what to do to get rid of it. All that and more coming up today on the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. The Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener is sponsored in part by, for all your non-GMO, heirloom, organic, vegetable, flowers, and herb seeds, visit dollarseed.com. Sioux Growing Supply, located in Wausau, Wisconsin, focusing on certified leaf compost, an excellent amendment for poor soil. With their new garden blend, improving soil structure in clay and sandy soil, great for creating new garden beds. Also available from Sioux's, pre-filled trays and pots with professional potting soil mix or organic rice hull-based potting soil mix. Bag and bulk of certified leaf compost also available. Visit SiouxGrowingSupply.com. Don't poison your soil with municipal water. Attach a body, mind, and soil hose and filter. Free shipping exclusively through the WisconsinVegetableGardener.com. Just click on the body, mind, and soil icon. Authentic Haven brand soil conditioner for the home gardener. Easy to brew, 100% organic. Visit ManureTea.com. Rain Reserve. Reserving your rain, preserving our future. Rain Reserve, manufacturing of rainwater capturing capabilities. Visit rainreserve.com and use coupon code RAIN2016 to save 10% on your total purchase. Welcome to the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener. I'm Joy Baird. It's come to that time of year where we're going to harvest our spaghetti and butternut squash. We've got tomatoes growing and still producing, but we'll let those be and we'll focus on the winter squash at hand. Now we've got two varieties. We've got butternut and we've got spaghetti squash. The spaghetti squash, if you've never grown that, it is a winter squash that when you cook the meat or the flesh or the internal portions of the squash and you string it out with a fork, it's like spaghetti noodles. It's very popular in vegan and vegetarian cuisines. And it's low carb as well. So what we've got spaghetti and butternut, and then we've got a cross, and some of you may also have this problem as well, and we'll discuss that in a minute. So the way you know when your spaghetti and your spaghetti squash and your butternut squash is ready is, one, you want to get it inside before a freeze comes or a hard frost. So even if it's not completely ripe, you can still harvest it, bring it inside. They will ripen inside in a cool, dry place. So again, you want to look at the color. You've just kind of got this tannish, light brown color in pigmentation, as well as the ideal telltale sign is that this top portion is dry. This stem here is, which it's not completely, but we're going to go ahead and harvest it just to get them out of the garden. And you can also do it early if you have problems with critters or theft in some instances. You can get them early out and bring them inside and cure them. So the ideal, you just don't want to snap this off because it's very tender up here, and if you snap this off, you're going to encourage the inner portions to dry out much quickly. Now this will keep in a root cellar, a basement, underneath the bed, in a cool, dry cabinet for upwards of 4 to 6, maybe 7 months. We've had them last over a year before. I will warn you that at that point, they are very dry inside and they've lost all they're just not good. They are edible, but they just don't have that pop that a fresh squash has, obviously, if it's been sitting on the shelf for over a year. So you want to take your shears, something of that matter, scissors, and you want to cut about an inch from the top of the plant, or the fruit here. You can see that it is still wet. There is still moisture coming out of it, but that's not bad there. That's a good little size squash. That's 2-pounder there. Now let's talk about, we'll leave that there. Let's talk about the spaghetti squash. First, let's talk about when to harvest your Hubbard squash, because we've got one of those here that's So this is our green Hubbard squash. Now there are blue Hubbard and orange Hubbard squash. This here is about 5 pounds or so. 5, I'd say about 5 pounds, about the size of a bag of sugar. And that's perfectly fine for one meal, maybe 2 meals in a super stew. If you're familiar with Hubbard squash, they can get very, very large, meaning 30, 40, even 60 pounds is not an uncommon mature Hubbard squash. That's a mighty big size, and that I've seen successful backyard gardeners grow them. But to know when to harvest this, the key is, or one of the key is, the stalk here going into the actual fruit. That is very, very green. That is not ready to harvest. You want it to almost be a cork consistency, a very dry, just like a cork in a wine bottle or cork in of any type. You want it to be kind of that dry, spongy. Now, if it's going to come a hard freeze or snow or that type of thing, you can harvest these early and they will ripen slightly inside, but you want to just give this as long as possible, and that's the key in planting a lot of these winter squashes that take a duration of time of 90 to 130, 140 days to reach maturity. So now let's talk about our spaghetti squash. So here is our spaghetti squash, and we've used this cardboard as mulch, and it's worked really, really well, and we're definitely going to implement that in other applications next year in the garden. So here's one of the spaghetti squashes, and this one is ready to harvest because the vine, well, kind of a couple things here. The actual vine here is dead, so no more nutrients is going to the fruit itself. So I'm just going to take, and again, we want to cut, leave an inch, 2 inches, and for the most part, that is dry. And these will ripen a little bit more inside, but that is a good size 3-4 pound spaghetti squash. So I'm going to go and harvest the rest of our squash here, and then we'll talk about a cross squash that may be very prevalent in, or that you may possibly have, and you're not sure what's going on, why it's not a spaghetti or a butternut squash. So in our little garden here, we've harvested our spaghetti squash as well as our butternut squash. Largest one, 5-6 pounds, something like that. Smaller ones here, and our 2 spaghetti squash. Now we do have more spaghetti squash, well no spaghetti squash. We do have 1 butternut squash that is still very green. We still have the projection of another 14 days with no chance of frost whatsoever, so we're going to leave that alone, as well as we did find some what is called black rot on our spaghetti squash, or black rot on our butternut squash. Now this can occur during the growth as well as post-growth, and when you're in the house and it's sat there on the shelf for a while. This is just a skin thing, something with the skin that if too much water, if it's getting really a lot of water, it can cause this. It's still edible. You cut it open. Now if this is internal in the flesh, you don't want to eat that. But if it's just skin deep, you're totally fine to eat that. This would be one that you would choose to go ahead and use first. With these here are perfectly fine. So keep that in mind. If that's what you're seeing, that is what it is. Just an excessive amount of water. Sometimes you control it, sometimes you can't. So just keep that in mind. It's called black rot. Nothing terribly wrong with it unless it goes internally, and then you want to avoid that. So we have a cross squash, and that's what this is here. We've got 3 of them. We got one of the tomatoes amongst there. We got one on the other side of the fence, and then this is the largest one. That is supposed to be a spaghetti squash, but as you can see, the color is not the same. This will almost turn a dark yellow, almost an orange, and it's not a true spaghetti squash. It is a cross. When you cut it open, it will have the density of internal flesh like a butternut squash, but kind of have a cross of a taste of a pumpkin, butternut squash, kind of a variety of different squashes. What has occurred there is during the process that the manufacturer or the seed supplier or the farmer harvested the seeds, and there were clearly a cross between a couple different varieties of squash. So that is what is kind of called, sometimes you'll get this with a pumpkin and a zucchini. You'll get a pumpkin or a punk zook or whatever you want to call them. It's one of them. There's nothing wrong. That is a totally edible product. This is a total It'll turn a orangey yellow. It is edible, but it's not a spaghetti squash. You're not going to cut into it and get the stringy stuff out. You're going to have to cook it down, that type of thing. But those are edible, and if you see something in your garden like that you didn't plant, that's what it is. It's a cross of a variety of different squashes, not necessarily because you did it, but the people that saved the seeds from the farm that was providing the seed supplier the seeds. That's where that happened. So we did get some squash here. In the straw bale garden, we will definitely do the straw bales again with probably the same varieties in them, and try to do some other things. We do have again, that's going to take a few more weeks to ripen, and we do have that fortunate opportunity with the weather being warm for that period of time to get these also to ripen.
Making your own raw fermented vinegar from fruit scraps is a simple process that you can do right in your own home. This is a finished product here. This is what I did about a year ago, and it is a pear scrap vinegar, kind of similar to a raw apple cider vinegar. It's a raw vinegar, it's fermented, and it has the benefits of a fermented food, a lacto-fermented food, so it's the probiotics, and it's useful in cooking and other applications in the kitchen. Making your own is simple. You can take the scraps from your pears or your apples. So you're making apple pie, making apple sauce, apple butter, pear pie, what have you. You just take the scraps. Here we had some pears that hit the concrete, so we just cut them up. They weren't very good, so we bruised up a little bit, so we cut them up. But you can just use the scraps, cores, stems as well. So what we do first is you process it with some sugar and some water. You want to use filtered water or water that is not chlorinated. After that sits for about a week, you then strain it out, and then it goes to this stage here where it's just beginning to ferment. It has kind of a alcoholic smell to it, like a wine or like a wine cooler. And then after a while, it will eventually darken and it will get the sediment on the bottom. And then you know it's ready. It'll go from smelling really kind of boozy to smelling like a vinegar. It does take time. It takes anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks for it to go from this stage to this stage, and it takes about a week to go from the pears or the apple scraps to where you strain it out to make it into the beginning of the vinegar fermentation. When you're doing this process, there are many. You can just go ahead to your favorite search engine. You can type in fruit scrap vinegar, and it gives you step-by-steps instructions and the proper measurements of what you want to add to your pear scraps, your apple scraps, to get it started, and kind of some troubleshooting ideas as well. As with anything in the kitchen, if you are unsure about it, if it looks questionable to you, when in doubt, throw it out. But this is a pretty simple process, and you can go ahead and make your own vinegar in your own home.
In the garden, whether you grow organically or inorganically, you are going to face problems with certain plants, pests, and diseases. One thing that we have run across this year that we've had a couple of years now is what is called bean rust. And this is an infected leaf, and it starts out with little brown dots with yellow circles around it, and then it escalates to this point. You will know it's bean rust because it's just like you touched a rusty piece of metal. You've got that powder, that brown powder on your hands. Now, what bean rust is, it's a fungus that is air delivered. It can travel from very far distances and infect your green beans or pole beans. You don't want to compost these because this fungus doesn't die over the winter. If you put this in the compost pile, even at extreme heats, it's not going to break down the fungus in the bean rust fungus. You're going to reintroduce it into your garden and infect bean plants again next year. So a couple of things that can happen here. Now our beans are being infected, some more severe than others. And we'll take a look at the other pole beans. We have infected plants that are regenerating healthy foliage again and producing more beans. So what you can do here is at a young stage, this usually hits about mid-season, so people say, well, rip it up and plant more. Well, at that point, your time is very limited to your average first frost. They will continue to produce beans. Now, the beans can be infected as well. If the beans are infected with the same type of rust or spottiness, you don't want to can them. It's not recommended to can them. You can eat them, but if you want to just be best about it, you can discard them. Most of our beans, 99% of the beans that are on our infected plants are not infected by the rust at all. So we'll take a look at the other pole beans and we'll show how it's still infected, but it's creating more growth. So rust on your pole beans really is not something that can be controlled because it's airborne, and even in big ag industry, there's stories, or you'll hear the local extension office say that soybean rust is in the area and it can eradicate or damage multiple acres and square mileage of soybean fields with the same problem when it comes to soybean rust as well as rust on your pole beans. So here's the other trellis that has the rust, and we also have new growth developing on the same stalks that the rust is on. So what can you do to get rid of it? It's really luck of the draw whether or not you get it. At this point, at the end of the season, you can take down these plants, try to be careful about it so you're not infecting, dropping them on the ground. Try to pick up all the foliage that you can, and you can put it in the landfill. You can burn it, but also burning it will bring it back in the atmosphere, and hopefully maybe it will blow in the opposite direction of your garden, that it's not going to stay in the soil. You can put it in a plastic bag and put it in a landfill. That'd probably be the ideal thing. Again, it's very unappealing. It doesn't look good at all, but it still allows the plant to photosynthesize and put pods and beans on. So soybean or bean rust, that may be what you have. That's why it looks so bad, but it's still produced. So now you know what you have and how you may be more careful about touching them and infecting other areas of your garden. Thanks for joining me. Join me again next time for more organic gardening and food production. I'm Joy Baird, and this has been the Wisconsin Vegetable Gardener.
For more information, please visit thewisconsinvegetablegardener.com.